you guys a special lecture on
It's a secret.
secret. Okay.
I want to welcome everybody. Today we're going to talk about what the tonal center is in a piece of music and how it became developed and then weakened through the major eras of music history. A few things to think about before we jump into this topic. What is a tonal center? A tonal center is the key in which a piece of music is written. So if we have no sharps and flats and it starts on a C and ends with a C, we know that we're in C major. We can say that C major is the tonal center of that piece. We're going to look at this sheet of paper during our talk today, and we're going to have listening examples in this packet. And just feel free to browse, listen. Some of the terms I'm going to throw at you today, you may or may not know, and that's okay. We're going to take a little tour of music history and talk about some harmony in conjunction with that in order to explain where we're going today. So first of all, let's just talk about C major. We know, we all play scales in this room. The C major scale is, there are 7 degrees in the scale. All major scales are built on the cookie cutter mold of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. I'd like to call your attention to 2 terms. Tonic, as in hair tonic, tonic. Tonic is always 1. Tonic is 1, and it's 8. It's the 8th scale degree. They're the same tone. They are an octave or 2 octaves or 3 octaves apart, depending on where you are on your instrument. But tonic is always 1 and 8. The other tone I wanted to tell you about was the leading tone. Leading tone is a half step below tonic. So if we have our tonic is C, that leading tone is a half step under it. It's a half step, and it always brings our ear back to tonic. So this note, the leading tone note, is very important in music history, especially once we hit the Baroque era and go through classical and romantic music. It's this leading tone that does it all. It develops the tonal center and it draws us back to the home key or the tonal center of the piece. So let's go on. Let's look a little further at the primary chords. We know that on each of those 8 scale degrees, you can actually build a triad or a chord. Right, here's 1, here's the triad. On top of it, each of these triads is given a number, and we use Roman numerals, yikes, in music to assign the numbers to these chords. And I know in school a lot of you guys don't use Roman numerals, and we're not even going to use Roman numerals much today. In some of your musics, you're going to see some Roman numerals, and you don't have to look and find that now, but you'll see them at the bottom under some of the harmonies. So the most important chords we're going to look at today are your primary chords. Those are your 1 chord, your 4 chord, your 5 chord, and then back to the 1 chord. So the primaries are simply the 1, the 4, the 5, wants you to finish. It takes you back to tonic. So that leading tone is in your 5 chord. 5 chords are power chords. Tension, calm. So, in any case, I want to introduce another term to you. The term diatonic. Diatonic, it's actually number 5 on your sheet. It applies to all the notes that occur in a given key signature. So here's the key of the scale D major. Diatonically, F sharp and C sharp happen in that scale of D major, right? We all should know that, or we kind of know that. So diatonically, F sharp and C sharp occur diatonically in the key of D major. The next term we need to know is chromatic or chromaticism. So most of us hear the word chromatic, we think of sharps and flats. And so when we look at a piece of music that's in D major and we see a B flat or an A sharp or a G sharp, we have to think those are chromatic notes, or chromaticism is being used in this music. And that we will look at that as we listen to examples today. When we hear lots of chromaticism in a piece, we know that the tonal center of that piece is starting to fracture and break down and loosen and get away from the basic primary chords. That's going to go away as we listen to what I'm going to keep telling you. So, here, we're going to just talk about the history, the eras of music history. So we're going to just do a quick tour here. Medieval times, 495 to 1450 AD. Most of the music from this period was developed in the churches, and the music was sung by monks, and the music was a Gregorian chant, and it sounded something kind of like this. There's not really that, I can't hear any of that in the Gregorian chant. The Renaissance period, it's music that if you go to the madrigal performances or if you sing in madrigals, you'll be hearing a lot of Renaissance music. A lot of you take part in these events. The music is taken originally from the church and it became more out of the church and into people's homes or secular. And as that happened, composers wrote songs rather than church chants for religious purposes. And these songs were about unrequited love, about the cute little girl that he knows he can never catch, things like this. And there was some use of leading tone, lots of this kind of sound though. Fourths, or even fifths. So you're still not there. You still haven't even gotten the leading tone. Think about your Bach, think about your Vivaldi. Bach really started organizing music. He created the 2-part inventions. They were written for keyboard players and they were written in every single major and minor key. And in doing these inventions and other pieces, he created and really formalized our instruction of major and minor key signatures, how we know it today. We're going to hear, as I said, we're going to hear examples of all of these things. In the classical period, think about Haydn, think about Mozart. We know a little bit about what those pieces sound like. We're going to hear some of that, but I'm sure some of you have heard a little Eine kleine Nacht music or Haydn's Surprise Symphony. We're going to think about the Romantic period. What happens is that in this period, these composers, Mendelssohn, Schubert, Brahms, they're starting to use a lot more chromaticism. There are going to be a lot more sharps on the page, a lot more flats on the page, a lot more naturals, a lot more accidentals occurring, because as we go through all these composers, we're going to see that the tonal center is being shooken up and being taken away from us. And then I just mentioned the Impressionistic period because it's so beautiful, and Debussy was very clever, and he created the whole tone scale, which sounds kind of like this. It's very pretty. So it gives this other kind of sound that's very interesting, but it definitely is not. And that's why I chose to put the Impressionistic Debussy in our talk. In 20th century, some very interesting things were happening especially in America. A lot of composers started experimenting with music. And this was called aleatoric music, or music that happens by chance. One famous, do you have a question? No. One famous composer is John Cage, and he wrote a piece called 4 minutes, 33 seconds. And in this piece, his idea was that he would get all the people to come into the auditorium and sit down and prepare to hear a piece, and then nothing would happen. It was just quiet. And all you could hear is, like, she just went, oh, or you could hear the clock or whatever, or the air conditioner. You could hear people looking at their programs. So the concert, the performance is actually those sounds, the people moving in their chairs. So there's no tonal center in that whatsoever. That's like very far away from what we've been talking about with leading tones and C major and 5 chords and all of that. So John Cage also experimented with other kinds of things. He used nature. He went out into the nature a lot. He took a conch shell, a chambered nautilus, poured water in there, and then just started moving the shell, recording it all the while, and however he moved that shell became music. That was the music. It's indeterminate, meaning it's uncertain. We don't know what we're going to get. Because tomorrow I'll come along and say, wow, I want to play that piece. Give me a different shell. So I pick up my own shell, and how I move it is going to be totally different than how John Cage did it yesterday. And then when you guys try, it's going to sound different. When he went into nature and he walked in a forest and he recorded the sounds of walking on dry twigs and leaves and the crunch, crunch, crunch and the snap, crackle, pop going around him. And that was music now in the mid-20th century. So yikes. Tonal center, is getting far away from this. We don't hear any of that in John Cage's music because it's completely experimental. Other composers had ideas. Fling a piano out the window of an apartment building and listen to it crash on the concrete. Wow, that's music now. Or, maybe it's going to land in a pool of water. Swish! It's going to make different sounds. So experimental. So that was very big in the 20th century, which brings us to today. In the 21st century, a lot of composers are writing new music. And new music, we're going to hear an example of that today as well. New music stems from the classical traditions. It's a mixture of different sounds, distortions of rhythm, and distortions of the tonal center. The composers pulled from all types of music. Rock and roll, jazz, blues, classical. To appreciate new music today, we often have to listen to this music many, many times over in order to fully understand it. I'm going to perform a few examples from these eras, and in some parts of the scores I circled where there's a non-harmonic tone or a non-diatonic tone as we go through. This is Roman numeral 1, and I know again in school you don't learn these numbers. Roman 1, Roman 5, that has your leading tone note, and Roman 4. Those are your primary chords. So if you see those, that's what those mean when you're looking. So the invention, a few measures. A minor. It's the harmonic minor because of the G sharp. The G sharp is not a chromaticism in this piece. It's diatonic, even though it's not in the key signature. In that A minor scale, we have that at the top of the scale, the augmented second. So that leading tone, G sharp, really wants to go up to A. So look in the first measure of this, you can see the A minor tries begins the piece. And then Roman 5, back to 1. And Bach did that so beautifully. It's just as clear as the light of day to see how beautifully he composed. And you can hear the pull of the leading tone. And the tonal center is clearly A minor in this piece. We have another example here. Let's listen to a little bit of the Mozart Sonata in A major. So, this is in 6/8, it's in A major, and if you'll notice, the first 3 lines are written in a diatonic manner. There are no sharps and flats except for what's in the key signature. So Mozart did not use chromaticism in this first section of this sonata. Let's listen. Curiously, as you look down the page to variation number 1, who sees a sharp in variation? Raise your hand if you see a sharp. See any sharps in variation 1? Right away. He starts it with a B sharp. B sharp, what's that doing in A major? A major has only 3 sharps and none of them are a B sharp. But he does it because he's helping develop music, and he's helping get away from necessarily something that's more simple, like. So in this, you can hear the style so cleverly and beautifully written. It's amazing because you can really say that the B sharp is a leading tone to C sharp. We don't have to say, well, how could that be? We're in A major. What's that have to do with courses? The point is that the C sharp, the second note in this piece, is preceded by a B sharp. So the B sharp becomes the leading tone. So we're really getting into like leading tones and miniature leading tones within great big pieces of work. So if he didn't write it with these leading tones, this is what we would have. And helping music history move on its way and really have the Western ear listen and want to listen for leading tones. Whoa, that's a big chromaticism right there. Without it, sounds bland. So he knew that using these half steps, these sharps and flats within his music would make it sound, wow, give it a huge punch. Really fantastic. Really creating strong tonal centers within music. Let's listen to something else. Oh, we have here the Mozart Sonata in C major. It's a wonderful piece. Many of you have probably studied a lot of this repertoire that I brought today. If you look at it, under the first line, I wrote down your chords. And your chords are the major 1 chord, the 5, and I added a 7 because it's got that, the 7th degree is your 5. Here's, so the 5 chord in the second measure has the 7 in it. So that's what that 7 is doing there. And that's a 1, and then a 4, and then a 1, 5, 1. So that's what the Roman numerals are under, so that's what you're looking at. And again, this part is completely diatonic, meaning there are no sharps and flats added to this key signature. And only here does he start to add his C sharp. Because he did a little kind of a D major scale. And Beethoven, right away, in the first measure, I circled an A sharp. A sharp is not in the key signature. It is a chromatic tone. It's not diatonic in the key of G major. So right away, so that A sharp, that adds the chromaticism, and it really, it serves as a leading tone to be natural. But in this piece, we definitely, if he didn't do the A sharp, it just wouldn't have the punch and the desirability that the Western ear really wants to hear. So we can see that as music's going, we still have the 1, 4, 5, but now we have more chromatic tones introduced in the piece. So Beethoven just kept it going. Then we enter the Romantic period. This is a little piece of an arabesque written by Robert Schumann. So this is after Beethoven. And some of you might have even studied this piece. And just a few snippets from it. It looks like it's in C major. It's in 2/4 time. And it's, when I listen to this piece in a concert hall, it's kind of hard to really identify now what key I'm in. The tonal center is really starting to break apart now because it was very together in Mozart. In Mozart we had, let's listen to this. What's going on? We were all doing this. And now all of a sudden we're doing this. Slowing down. What's happening? So he's using time, he's distorting time, and he's also distorting this. At the end of this piece is made of many sections. But I took a clip from the last section because it's very interesting. The piece mostly, it has different sections, but let's just keep in mind the first section. And now this is the last section. He starts off in this F major 7 chord. And it's slow. So he's distorting pitch by starting on this very strange chord. Closer to the 20th century, closer to the 1900s, and this is happening in music. So we can see the example of what happens. Debussy, a little bit of Clair de Lune. We can listen just a little bit. It's in D flat major, but it's kind of, because he uses that whole tone scale, it's kind of hard to hear the primary chords. Right away, there's an A natural thrown in, chromaticism. have this piece called Pilgrim's Soul, which was written in 2011 by an American composer named Augusta B. Thomas. She lives in Chicago, and she wrote this piece for two violins and English horn. And this is a score of it, because we don't have two violins and an English horn to play it for you today, but you can kind of get the idea a little bit. So it's in 4/4, it's in C major, but at the end, you guys tell me if you can really tell that it's in C major or that it's 4/4. Universities where composers are in residence, and that's their primary job, is to compose new music, perform it, and teach their students how to compose. One thing for certain is that every composition student learns how Bach wrote music and his ideas. Those are the baby steps. Those are your building blocks, your scales, your arpeggio. All those things are the foundation. And all of the things we played today were built on that, and we can see how. So big picture, what's the takeaway? What I think is that in the beginning of music history, which I took you all the way back to Gregorian chant, there was no tonal center really. Then in time, along came the Baroque period, and there was a big tonal center. There was a leading tone, the use of the leading tones taking you back to tonic or do. And then the classical period developed it even more, and the romantic period even more. And then what happened was we had experimental music, not to mention even jazz and blues and so many other things that I didn't even get into today because we only have 45 minutes. But we kind of came through full circle because today, this new music, it doesn't sound like the Gregorian chants, but it also lacks a leading tone, and it really lacks where's 1, where's 2, where's 3, and where's 4. You really can't hear it. So, did music make a circle? Maybe we did in a roundabout kind of way, possibly. This has been a very brief discussion on how the tonal center has changed in music over the years. People spend entire lifetimes studying this material. These were just a small smattering of examples that I chose because I thought some of them might be familiar to you. I wonder how classical music will sound when your grandchildren are born. Thank you very much.
And so, can you check if they really understand about the Tani, the Dana?
I want to ask if they have questions now, because we have 10 minutes, 7, 8 minutes. Who has questions about anything at all that we talked about today? Because you guys, I didn't really introduce myself. I teach piano here in Peoria. I teach violin. I play violin professionally in the Knox Galesburg Symphony. I have my master's degree in music education from Western. I grew up in New York. Sorry for the bad accent, but what can I say? So, yeah. So if you guys have any questions, now's a great time to ask.
So
Go.
Since the tonic is 1 and 8 and the leading tone 7, what would 4 and 5 be?
So 4 is the 4 chord, or well, 5 chord is the dominant, and so the 4 chord is called the subdominant, below. It's one step below.
So, the
Yeah.
chord based on the first note is called Tani chord.
Exactly.
And let's just say tonic note. And then this concept is, what was that again?
The leading tone, right? The leading tone.
And then Jason asked about the fourth note, right? Or subdominant, because it's under the
Dominant.
Okay. Now, and you just mentioned on
The supertonic.
supertonic, like Superman.
Supertonic.
Supertonic. Like Superman flies, supertonic is right above the tonic. And
The 3 chord.
yeah, 3
a much more simple depiction, just because I was teaching to the larger group.
Can I test them if they can hear the subdominal cord or
Yeah.
abdominal cord?
Sure.
So how about you raise your right hand when you hear tiny, and when you hear subdominant, right, raise your left hand, and when you hear raise your right hand when you hear the tiny chord, then you hear dominant, raise your left hand, and you hear subdominal chord, you stand up, okay? And then,
Great. So what I'm gonna do first is